I'm Sarina Dorie. The title of this piece is Love Me Tinder. It originally appeared in Electric Spec. No one in Tokyo talks about internet dating, which isn't to say people don't do it. But all my friends online, my monster friends, were like, "What? You haven't been on a date in 100 years? OMG, Kiriko, you've got to try Tinder." I discovered you just swipe the picture aside if the guy looks like a creeper, and you only get messaged by men whose pictures you like. I got 200 messages in 3 days. Maybe it was because they saw the photoshopped glamour shots of my face. I should have realized that would be a problem. The first few dates ran screaming from the secluded cave where I suggested we meet. Or I should say, they tried to run. I caught them in my web and very patiently explained that just because I was a spider from the waist down didn't mean I was heartless. I have needs too. I'm just like any other girl who wants to be loved, I said. When that didn't work, I spun my spider silk around them and saved them for later, hoping they would change their minds. So the story is about a monster woman, a Jorogumo, which is a spider woman from Japanese folklore. And I was taking the idea of mythology and combining it with modern culture and giving this spider woman a scenario where she was trying to find a date on Tinder. Unfortunately for both her and the date, the evening does not go as planned, but it is a humorous story, so it's a humorous ending. When I was writing the story, it was part of a larger series, which is a little bit different than the average story. So it still has a traditional story structure, but I also wanted to make a series arc that goes with it. And the series arc really is about a man who's obsessed with monster women who goes on dates with them, and each date ends progressively worse than the last. The plot for the story was easy for me because I knew what the character wanted. And this story was through the date's point of view. I knew she wanted a date. The conflict, which really is what story structure and plotting depends on, the conflict in this story is that the female character wants this date, but she's not getting what she wants. She tries and she fails. And sometimes it's a very short story, but in this story, she is trying and being impeded by being a monster, but also being impeded how others, humans, see what being a monster means. So in like a traditional story sense, there's usually a try-fail cycle, and the try-fail has to be really short in a piece of flash fiction, but the try-fail for her was she's trying to go on a date with a human and it's not working out, and she tries something else on the date and it doesn't work out, and then finally we get to the end and you find out if she fails or succeeds in her mission. And the overall arc has sort of a similar structure with the other characters that they're trying and failing and trying again to finally have their perfect date with the monster or with the human. Yeah, so there are things that are my strengths and the things that come easy to me. And for me, humor comes very easily to me. Dialogue, character, fantastical elements. I write primarily science fiction and fantasy. Usually it's humorous. And so like those are the easy parts of writing a story, but plot is the difficult part. And so I've really worked on that over the years. And there are writers who are plotters, and they plan their stories. They write outlines. They really know what the story's about beforehand. And then there are pantsers, people who just fly by the seat of their pants and they just write and they discover what the story's about as they're writing. I'm a natural pantser, so I write and I figure out what the story's about as I write, but I also know that people who outline usually write faster, they have less editing to do afterwards. There's all sorts of benefits to it. So over the years, I really have tried to train myself to do some plotting with my novels especially, but also short stories. And time is always precious, whether you're a writer or anything else, that like we want to make sure we are managing our time well, and I want to write as much as I can. So I have tried to do a little bit of outlining here and there so that my plots don't run away from me and go off on tangents that might be might take me much longer to write a story if I didn't do that. So right now, the thing that has changed the most for me is that I am trying to do a combination of a little bit of plotting, just a little bit of outlining and planning before I get started, and then I write and I let, if the story wants to go in different directions, I do let unexpected things and unexpected twists happen, which make it more interesting. But then afterwards I go back and I do, it's not quite an outline, but I do make sure I have the core elements of a story and plot that will make it an interesting and successful story, or what I think is successful. Like it should have some story structure in there. Yeah, so sometimes I read other people's manuscripts, and the number one thing that I notice that people, especially newer writers, do is they don't have an actual plot. They have characters in a setting and there's dialogue and they're interacting, but there isn't a lot of conflict. It's hard to know what the plot is, and really one of the big reasons why it doesn't feel like there's a plot is that the character doesn't have a goal, and the character needs a goal and a conflict or an obstacle keeping them from getting to that goal, and that's going to create conflict. And there's lots of different kinds of conflict, internal conflict and external conflict, and having both make a story interesting. But I would say the number one thing that I would recommend to writers is make sure that the character has a goal, they have an obstacle, and that will create conflict, and conflict will create a natural plot. The number two thing I would recommend is to make sure that the protagonist is actively working towards achieving that goal, so that it is not an inactive protagonist or a protagonist who is, like in my critique group, we say a protagonist who isn't protagging. We want to make sure that they're active. I have always loved stories, so it's hard to narrow this down to a couple, but I just want to preemptively explain that I love twists and surprises. And even though I write primarily fantasy and science fiction, I love mysteries and how elements can be interconnected in a story. And some of the most incredible plots and plot twists that I have read, one of the most incredible stories is Holes by Louis Sachar. It is a YA novel, and there are maybe just a hint of metaphysical elements in that book, but it's also like the twists in it. Like, I can only dream of writing a plot that simple but complicated at the same time. I love the twists in Night Circus, which is a fantasy novel by Erin Morgenstern. I love the unexpected complications in Strange the Dreamer, and pretty much anything else written by Laini Taylor. She's definitely one of my favorite authors. Recently, I read a book by Sarah Gailey, Magic for Liars, and that is a mystery, but it's also an urban fantasy that she's a detective trying to investigate a murder at a magical boarding school. It's definitely my kind of book, and the twists of the mystery in that worked really well. For science fiction, I loved the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. It really had some excellent plot twists, character reveals, all sorts of unexpected things. One of, like, going back to YA, I loved Snape's true character being revealed in Harry Potter. I loved and was hooked by Peeta's twist of character in The Hunger Games. As far as like the classics, when I think about what I liked most about some classics, it really is the unexpected elements in the plot, the reversals of expectations that really hooked me. So even though people don't think of Pride and Prejudice as being extremely like modern, or things being relevant to today's books, I think it really is, because the reversal of villains and heroes is what makes books like Pride and Prejudice, Wuthering Heights, Great Expectations, Tale of Two Cities, all work really well. I love the twists in Jane Eyre. As far as movies, I think I value some of the same things. A lot of the things in books, I would say sometimes it relies more on character twist, but in movies, I loved Knives Out, which is a movie that came out in the last couple of years. It's a mystery, but it's the way that the plot is framed and filmed that make it a really memorable and unusual mystery, because it's really about plot twists. And when I think about some of the most memorable movies with plot twists over the years, The Sixth Sense and Memento were movies that really impressed me, that I watched and I would watch again. I see something new every time, and I always think, like, that is the kind of plot that I really want to be able to successfully pull off. But, it's very complicated. Even when I go back to my childhood and I think about the old Star Wars and that moment when Luke learns he has a sister and he finds out who it was, as a kid, I was so shocked. That plot twist was so incredible. That is the kind of plot twist that I want to be able to pull off as a writer. I don't know if I would say like a specific person of pop culture, but when I used to live in Japan. I lived in Sapporo, Japan, but I did visit Tokyo several times, and I was really mesmerized by the Gothic Lolita culture. I loved looking at the cosplay costumes and seeing some of the interesting ways that people dressed. So I would say that was like people watching in another country is always a very fun thing to do. Like, I could thank Electric Spec for publishing my story, Love Me Tinder. I would like to thank you, Todd Sullivan, for interviewing me and giving me this opportunity to talk about the story. I could always give a shout out for my mom, because she encouraged me to be a writer, even when I was 5 years old and I was drawing my own little picture books.